Okay, so we are now officially recording. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our June. It's still June. I feel like it's almost July. It's so hot out. It's like it's July. It's got to be July, but technically it's still June. So our June our IPM webinar. My name is Emily Zobel, and I am the Ag Agent in Dorchester County. Hayden, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Hayden Shug, and I'm the Ag Agent in Charles County.
Awesome. So the two of us are kind of the ones that are spearheading and running the IPM webinar series. So if you have any concerns or issues or need accommodations, you can reach out to either of us. Also, if you have any topics that you think would be good for next year, we are going to start planning next year's series pretty soon. And I know that today's topic is one that we always get lots of farmers and ag service providers talking about because weeds, I think, are the number one problem for most of our farmers, followed up by or right next to deer. If we could figure out how to get rid of weeds and deer, I feel like half of our jobs would be taken care of. So it is our pleasure to have Dr. Kurt Vollmer, who is the University of Maryland Extension Weed Management Specialist, join us today to talk about one very particular weed, Palmer amaranthus, and the other pigweeds that I know are, I think, some of the more challenging ones we have. So without further ado, I'm going to let Kurt go ahead and take it over.
All right, thank you, Emily. Hope everyone can see my slide. Please let me know if the slides do not change. All right, so just a reminder, university programs are open to everyone. So for this webinar, first I kind of want to start off with a little bit of pigweed ID. This may be a refresher for some, but it's always good to include. Some of our major pigweed species in Maryland include smooth and redroot pigweed, Palmer amaranth, spiny amaranth, common or tall waterhemp. Also, I've been seeing a lot of livid or purple amaranth in our fields lately. As far as identifying these species go, I always start with looking at the stems of the plant. Water hemp, livid amaranth, spiny amaranth, and Palmer amaranth are all going to have smooth stems, whereas smooth pigweed and redroot pigweed tend to have very hairy stems. Sometimes it can be difficult to really distinguish red root pigweed and smooth pigweed. Red root pigweed stems tend to have slightly more hairs than smooth pigweed stems, but just remember the ones that we're mostly concerned about, especially the Palmer amaranth and the water hemp, those are going to be the species that are going to have smooth stems. And with spiny amaranth, you also see a nice little spine coming off the leaf axil there. That's a very important distinguishing feature because a lot of times spiny amaranth can resemble Palmer amaranth, especially when it's smaller, maybe about 3 to 6 inches tall. Leaves, on the other hand, they can be sometimes a little bit challenging to distinguish between the different pigweed species. As I mentioned, small spiny amaranth can be the leaves can be a little difficult to distinguish between Palmer amaranth because both of those species have kind of a diamond-shaped leaf to them, and you really have to look at that stem to see whether or not there's a spine on that leaf axil to tell the difference between Palmer amaranth and spiny amaranth. Or, yes. Common water hemp, the leaves of this plant usually have these very long lanceolate or lance-like leaves compared to all the other species. Redroot, smooth pigweed, and smooth pigweed tend to have more oval-shaped leaves. They tend to have hairs on the undersides of the leaves or the underside of the leaf stem. And livid amaranth or purple amaranth, the leaves are very distinguishable because they tend to have that deep notch on the tip of the leaf that is not common in all of these other pigweed species. So again, when you're just looking at the individual leaves and the leaf petioles, redroot pigweed and smooth pigweeds, their leaves tend to be a little bit of a darker green. You can see from this picture, the redroot pigweed and smooth pigweed on the left. They also have a little bit deeper venation compared to spiny amaranth, waterhemp, and Palmer amaranth. And with Palmer amaranth, notice the leaf petiole on the far right picture is a lot longer compared to all of these other pigweed species. Now, the length of the leaf petiole is not going to be a distinguishing feature when these plants are smaller, but as they grow larger, get more leaves in the canopy, if you pull that leaf off and fold the petiole over the leaf, then that's a good sign that it's Palmer amaranth, if that petiole is actually longer than the leaf. Redroot pigweed, smooth pigweed, spiny, and waterhemp usually will not have that long petiole. But sometimes the petiole alone cannot be an identifying feature with Palmer amaranth. Temperature and heat stress can have a lot to do with being able to properly identify Palmer amaranth a lot of the times. Here's a picture of looking at Palmer amaranth leaves subject to varying levels of moisture stress. So as you can see, as we progress from the left, there's really no temperature and moisture stress, but as we go towards the right, all these plants are Palmer amaranth, but we don't see the same leaf characteristics as we would with, no temperature stress or moderate temperature stress. Flowers, redroot pigweed, smooth pigweed, all these pigweeds tend to have that nice little flower stalk. Both redroot pigweed, smooth pigweed, and spiny amaranth, all of their both their male and female flowers are located on the same plant, whereas male and female flowers for waterhemp and Palmer are located on separate plants. Redroot pigweed flowers tend to have more short and stubby seed heads, whereas the smooth pigweeds seed head flowers tend to be a bit longer. And with the spiny amaranth, you tend to see male and female flowers clustered together. And as I mentioned, Palmer amaranth and waterhemp, they do have both male and female flowers on separate plants. The male flowers of these species will produce pollen, so if you're in a field where these are actually producing seed, if you run your hand across the seed head, you'll notice that white pollen. As far as distinguishing, flowers of male or female Palmer amaranth from female waterhemp, the female waterhemp flowers tend to be a little more clustered together, whereas the female Palmer amaranth flowers produce these really sharp bracts. As I mentioned just now, when you have both male and female Palmer amaranth plants in the field, the male seed heads, they're going to be soft to the touch. And if you run your hand across them, they're going to produce a lot of pollen. But if you run your hand across the female flower, you're probably going to get stuck. So just as a review, water hemp, those leaves tend to be nice, long, linear. Sometimes they're oval shaped, but more or less they're going to have that lanceolate shape. The stems, they're going to not have any hairs. They can be green, they can be red, or they can be stripes. So color is not really that much of a good identifying feature. The seed heads, they're going to be about 1 to 2 feet long. Male and female, they're not going to be prickly like Palmer amaranth. And overall, water hemp is going to grow to a height of about 10 feet. Palmer amaranth, again, the leaves are going to mostly be diamond shaped, and they're going to have this like poinsettia-like appearance, especially if you look at it from above. Like water hemp, the stems aren't going to have any hairs. They can be green, red, or striped. Seed heads are going to be a little bit longer, especially in some of those larger plants. Those male flowers, again, they're going to be soft. They're going to shed pollen. And those female flowers are going to feel prickly. Also with Palmer amaranth, again, if you fold that petiole over, in most cases on the lower leaves, they're going to have that long petiole that's going to be longer than the leaf. Another feature that a lot of Palmer amaranth plants have is going to be this tiny little hair at the notch of the leaf tip, but not all Palmer amaranth plants have that. And Palmer amaranth is going to be one of our tallest growing pigweeds, up to about 10 feet tall. So again, spiny amaranth. Spiny will also have those long petioles, but it's also going to have that spine at the base, not like Palmer amaranth. The stems are also going to, again, they're going to be hairless, red or green. The seed heads, the male flowers, usually located at that terminal spike, and the female flowers are going to be in the axils of the stem. And spiny amaranth is one of those shorter growing plants, only up to about 5 feet compared to Palmer amaranth. Redroot pigweed, again, those leaves are going to be oval, diamond, or egg-shaped, and the veins are going to, again, be more dissected, very prominent. Both these plants, redroot pigweed and smooth pigweed, tend to have these more wavy marges. The stems, many fine hairs. If you look at the underside of the leaf, you'll also see a lot of tiny hairs there as well. The seed heads, again, the male and female flowers are going to be on the same plant. Redroot pigweed has those short, thick, compact branches compared to smooth pigweed, and it's going to grow to be about a height of about 3 to 6 feet tall. So just a little bit of kind of a pigweed ID quiz, because a lot of times, most of the fields I've visited lately, we've had a combinations of either Palmer amaranth or smooth and redroot pigweed. Now, in the picture on the right, two different pigweed species, but if you look at the picture the picture on the left, two different pigweed species, two different very larger pigweed species. You see one that's more of a darker lime green color, and above that in the top right-hand corner, one that's a little bit more of a lime green color. So the one that has a lime green color is Palmer amaranth. The one right next to it is smooth pigweed, and you can kind of tell the smooth pigweed because, again, the leaves have more deeply recessed venation. It's a little, and it's the darker green. The top right-hand picture, the larger plant, that is, again, you see a little bit more deeply recessed venation on the leaves, a little bit darker green. Again, that's smooth pigweed as well. But all those tiny plants below it, those are Palmer amaranth. And finally, on the picture on the bottom right of your screen, you see a bunch of, lime green, dark green smooth pigweeds, as well as some, Palmer amaranth popping up right in between those smooth pigweed plants. So again, it's important to know, to be able to identify these weeds, not just by their stems, but at the leaf stage. So if you just happen to be driving by your field and you happen to notice something with, really bright green leaves, really bright diamond-shaped leaves, you might want to get out of your truck and check it out and see make sure you do not have Palmer amaranth. So a little bit on pigweed biology. Mostly just some stuff about strengths and weaknesses of Palmer amaranth. The first strength and weakness of of pigweeds are going to be its seeds. Weakness being Palmer amaranth seeds have a relatively short lifespan in the soil. only about 3 to 4 years. But these plants go to seed, they can produce a lot of seed. I mean, looking at over 100,000 seeds per plant. So even though they might have a short lifespan in the soil, if they're constantly reproducing each year, that soil seed bank it keeps building and building and building. So it's really important to target seed production to prevent plants from going to seed so we can significantly reduce those populations over time. And I'll discuss more on that later. Some of the weaknesses as far as the seed goes, those are very tiny seeds, and they tend not to germinate from very deep in the soil layer, maybe about a half an inch to up to an inch. So burying these seeds is one way to control these weeds. Also, with Palmer amaranth, a lot of the seeds are retained on the seed head at harvest, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. It's a good thing because you can pull, after these plants have set seed, you can pull the plants from the field and remove any additional additions to the seed bank. However, since these seeds are retained on the seed head at harvest, they will be spread by combines and other equipment as they move through the field. Also with the seeds, these plants, they're not very tolerant to shading, at least when they're small. Having some sort of cover or canopy established is really going to help to prevent any seeds from germinating later on in the growing season. These plants also prefer warm temperatures. Palmer amaranth likes warm temperatures for it to germinate. Typically, Palmer amaranth is going to germinate when it gets hotter, late April through the entire summer. But be aware that Palmer amaranth does have a much longer germination period than a lot of our summer annual weeds. So implementing, again, different cultural practices like cover crops or early in the season when you can help cool the soil, or some sort of crop rotation will also help with that competition with Palmer amaranth. Now getting into the nitty-gritty with pigweed control, I would be remiss to not mention Palmer amaranth or any of these pigweed species without mentioning herbicide resistance. In Maryland, both Palmer amaranth and waterhemp are resistant to, or suspected to be resistant to, glyphosate. Even though we haven't tested every single population in the state, we always err on the side of caution and assume that we have glyphosate-resistant Palmer amaranth and waterhemp. We also have smooth pigweed that's resistant to the group 5 herbicide, as well as redroot pigweed that's resistant to the group 2 herbicides. But we have been dealing with that level of resistance for over 20 years now. Now, both Palmer amaranth and waterhemp, I said the seeds can be both a strength and a weakness. With these plants producing so many seeds, there's a lot of chance for resistance to develop. So we're very lucky here in Maryland that we only have resistance reported to a couple herbicide groups, a couple herbicide sites of action. In the United States, we have Palmer amaranth resistant to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 8 different sites of action, and waterhemp as well. And new sites of action or resistance to new herbicides are being reported all the time. So it's very important that we use integrated weed management tactics to control Palmer amaranth and don't just rely on what's working right now. just to make you all aware of some stuff, last year we collected some Palmer amaranth seed from populations in Maryland and Delaware, and we actually screened them for resistance to the group 2, the ALS inhibitors, the group 27, the HBPD inhibitors, and the group 14s, the PPO inhibitors. What we saw was some populations were resistant to the sulfonylurea or group of ALS inhibitors. This includes herbicides like halosulfuron, but they were susceptible to the imidazolinone resistant imidazolinone herbicide group, which includes herbicides like Raptor. We also noted that some of the plants in our screening showed some tolerance to post applications of a group 27 herbicide, mesotrione, and a PPO inhibitor, Reflex. So we're continuing to study those screen those populations to make sure we're not seeing any additional herbicide resistance. So as far as your weed control programs go with Palmer amaranth, waterhemp, other pigweeds, it's really important to start clean. If you plant your field into something that looks like this, then you're going to be out of luck. The Palmer is going to be too tall to spray by the time you make your first post-emergence application. So it's really important to, in my opinion, to apply residual herbicides at planting. Why at planting, or as soon after planting as possible? With a crop like soybeans, you really don't want to apply your residual herbicide 2 weeks along with your burn down treatment. You want to apply it before, right when those soybeans go into the ground, because that residual herbicide is only going to last you about 4 weeks. So if you're applying your residual with your burn down treatment, you've only got 2 extra weeks before that residual begins to fade, and you're going to have to apply that post-emergence application. As far as pre-emergence herbicides go for corn and soybean, with corn, you really want to include atrazine in with your tank mix. A lot of the pre-mixed products, things like Lexar, Lumax, Acuron, those are going to be very effective pre-emergence products for weed control. Just anything that's really going to include that atrazine component. Even atrazine plus Princep is going to do well against Palmer amaranth. Now, for pre-emergence weed control in soybean, we usually recommend something like a group 14 herbicide, like Valor or Spartan, combined with metribuzin for the most effective weed control. A lot of different tank mix products on the market out there. Fierce MTZ is a combination of Valor, pyroxasulfone, and metribuzin. Panther MTZ, metribuzin, and flumioxazin. You can also apply a metribuzin with your group 15 herbicides, things like Dual. Those are also going to be effective, but you're probably going to get a little bit better control with that group 14 plus metribuzin combination. Now, I know herbicides aren't the only way to do pre-emergence weed control and get started and start clean. Tillage is also an option for starting clean if you're growing organic. However, since Palmer amaranth does emerge throughout the entire growing season, tillage has to be a frequent operation, and you really can't till after a certain stage. Now, as far as emergence go, again, in my opinion, I like pre-emergence herbicides better than relying on just straight tillage. So in this table, this is a study I did several years ago, looking at different tillage regimes, either no-till, spring-till, or fall moldboard plow over a period of about 3 years. So in this study, again, we no-tilled every year, we spring-tilled every year, and we fall moldboard plowed the first year, and the rest and the other 2 years were no-till. So with our we also looked at, do we need to add a pre-herbicide with these treatments or no pre-herbicide with these treatments? So at least for everything that had a pre-emergence herbicide, regardless of the tillage regime that we used, Palmer amaranth density about 4 weeks after planting was similar with no significant differences. However, when we just look at tillage regimes itself with no pre-emergence herbicide, that spring till treatment had a significantly higher number of Palmer amaranth seeds compared to either the no-till treatment or the fall moldboard plow treatment. Now, we also looked at this same study looking at a crop rotation for corn and soybeans. Either having a rotation with a pre-herbicide or no pre-herbicide. Again, whenever we had a pre-emergence herbicide, regardless of whether it was corn or soybean, we didn't see any significant differences in plant density 4 weeks after planting. When we did not include a pre-emergence herbicide, we saw significantly higher Palmer amaranth plants in our soybeans than we did in our corn. So, what does that have to do with anything? Well, corn is a little bit more competitive with Palmer amaranth. So planting often occurs when temperatures are slightly lower and the growth rate of Palmer amaranth is a little bit slower. So think about when we're planting corn April to early May, and Palmer amaranth is just starting to germinate. So corn's going to come up faster. It's going to be more competitive, but it's not going to completely compete with Palmer amaranth. Also, corn gets taller a lot faster, and they can improve weed suppression. Sorghum can do this as well. Now, corn soybean rotation, that's the standard. If you include a small grain like a wheat rotation for something like a double crop soybeans, this allows you to treat a larger percentage of Palmer amaranth plants that have emerged and can be controlled with that non-selective herbicide. So you think right now we're just at the end, we're just starting to harvest wheat, getting through that harvest period, and then we're going to plant double crop beans in some areas. That Palmer, since it's been competing with the wheat, it's going to be a lot smaller. And you have the option of, again, using those more non-selective herbicides with your burn down to control it. And when you're planting double crop soybeans, it actually will be a little more effective if you apply your residual herbicide with that burn down treatment for your double crop beans, because you're not going to have those double crop beans are going to grow a lot faster, and you're not going to have to worry about that 4-week time lag as you would in your conventional bean treatment with those pre-emergence herbicides. And if any of you have a really serious Palmer problem, something including a perennial forage can help to provide a constant cover and allow for some more additional herbicides, some of those pasture herbicides that are very effective on broadleaf weeds that have a lot longer residual than most of our common corn and soybean herbicides. Cover crops, especially things like cereal rye, have been proven to be very effective on controlling Palmer amaranth and other pigweeds. As those cover crops are growing in the spring, the same with your conventional wheat crop. That crop is going to compete with those plants for nutrients such as water, and sunlight. And those cover crops are going to slow down the growth of those Palmer amaranth plants. The longer we allow these cover crops to grow and the closer we terminate these cover crops, the more effective they're going to be at managing Palmer amaranth. However, for cover crops to really suppress Palmer amaranth during the summertime, cover crop residue must be visible on the soil surface. Species with a lot of leaves and fleshy stems, i.e. your hairy vetch, other legumes, once those cover crops are terminated, those leaves are going to dry up and they're not going to leave you much of a mulch layer on the field. However, to terminate cereal rye at the right stage, you're going to have this nice layer of mulch, which is going to help with weed suppression. Now, cover crops, they're only going to suppress weeds. Cover crops cannot kill weeds, but these cover crops can help delay that time between having to apply between planting or applying a pre-emergence herbicide and those Palmer amaranth plants being about 4 inches tall, which is the time you need to spray them with your post-emergence treatments. And this graph here shows several treatments. Hairy vetch and crimson clover, they're not the best. They do something, but they're not going to be as effective as a cereal grain crop like wheat or cereal rye. Those two cover crops are going to provide much higher levels of suppression of Palmer amaranth for those first couple of weeks after planting compared to those leguminous leafy cover crops. Looking at some integrated weed management tactics. This is a study we did looking at Palmer amaranth control 4 weeks after planting, looking at different levels of cereal rye management, the red and white bars on your screen, or looking at cereal rye termination. Now, as far as cereal rye management goes, we looked at do we need to add nitrogen to a cereal rye cover crop or compared to a no rye cover crop? Or do we need to add a residual herbicide with that cover crop or no rye cover crop? So what this graph is showing is when we added a residual herbicide, regardless of whether or not we had a cover crop with or without nitrogen or a no cover crop, we had about 95% Palmer amaranth control 4 weeks after planting. However, when no residual herbicide was included, our cover crop treatments did significantly better than our no rye treatments. Now, on the previous slide, I talked about how important it was to have good cereal rye biomass for weed suppression. So cereal rye is something you want to wait to terminate as close to planting as possible. In this particular study, looking at those dark green bars on the graph, we looked at terminating cereal rye 20 days before planting or 10 days before planting. And when we terminated closer to planting, we got much better, about 80% control of Palmer amaranth 4 weeks after planting compared to about 75% with that early cereal rye termination. And again, so by terminating late, we're getting more biomass, not getting complete control, but that having that higher biomass is really going to help suppress the weed throughout the growing season. It's really going to complement your post-emergence herbicide application. So talking about biomass, talking about termination, how much biomass is really needed for pigweed control? Well, most sources say you're going to need about 8,900 pounds per acre of cereal rye to really suppress about 80% of Palmer amaranth. However, there have also been studies that show that between 980 and 1960 pounds per acre can provide about 70% density reduction. I know planting cover crops can be challenging some years. Sometimes you get more biomass one year. Sometimes you don't get the level of biomass you want another year. But it's always beneficial to consider introducing a cover crop into your crop cycle, your crop rotation, if you're dealing with pigweeds like Palmer amaranth and waterhemp. As far as the economic viability of planting cover crops go, the table above shows estimates that after 1 year of cover cropping in a corn and soybean rotation, there's a benefit of about $0 to $15 per acre in weed control cost after 5 years of cover cropping. Savings increase to about $10 to $25 per acre. And these estimates are based on the assumption that there was a decrease in the number of herbicide passes needed because of the benefits from the cover crops, or cheaper herbicides were used. These also assume that a sufficient cover crop biomass was achieved in order to suppress these weeds. Now, when severe infestations of herbicide-resistant weeds are present, like Palmer and waterhemp, the adjusted net return on cover crops and corn in the presence of these weeds is -4, $28, and $45 per acre over a 5-year period. In soybeans, the net return was estimated to be about $3, $27, and $37 per acre, respectively. So cover crops to combat herbicide resistance weeds will put you in the black a lot faster in soybeans than in corn. Cereal rye cover crop is much easier to get established in a soybean crop, especially if you're looking at a corn-soybean rotation. Corn comes off a lot earlier than soybeans. It's harvested a lot earlier, so you can get that cover crop planted and established a lot earlier in most cases than in corn, which follows where soybeans follow a much later harvest compared to corn. Also, corn, again, is a little bit more competitive against weeds than soybeans. So it does take a few more years to kind of see the benefits of utilizing those cover crops. But cover crops aren't the only way to help reduce weed emergence, especially with soybeans. A good way to prevent Palmer amaranth or more Palmer amaranth from germinating in your fields is to reduce that row spacing. Again, these species are not going to be not very shade tolerant. So if you can reduce your canopy spacing from just 30 inches to 15 inches, the canopy is going to close a lot faster. And we've seen several studies that show reduced Palmer amaranth biomass and seed production in these reduced row soybean species, So on the for example, on the picture on the bottom left of your screen, these are Palmer amaranth plants planted in 7, 15, and 30-inch rows, and you can see a difference in the size and the number of seed heads, not only between that 7-inch on the left and the 30-inch on the right, but also between the 7-inch and the 15-inch and the 15-inch and the 30-inch row spacing. Post-emergent, so that's pre-emergence weed control, row spacing. Post-emergence weed control, number 1 rule, don't do this. If your pigweeds are larger than a can of soda, most of your post-emergence treatments are not only going to be ineffective, you're also going to be spraying sublethal rates of these registered herbicides like glufosinate, like 2,4-D, which is going to lead to additional herbicide resistance. So when we apply our post-emergence treatments, I know the slide I showed earlier only showed that we have resistance to glyphosate and group 2 herbicides, but we want to mix effective herbicides in our tank. So if we have Palmer amaranth that's resistant to glyphosate, and our post-emergence treatment includes 2,4-D or something like Enlist 1 plus glyphosate, really we're relying on just the 2,4-D component to control these weeds. And over time, we use the same chemistry year after year after year, just like glyphosate. That Palmer amaranth, that waterhemp's going to develop resistance to that as well. So what we want to do is tank mix 2 effective herbicide groups. In Maryland, we have not seen any resistance to 2,4-D, and we have not seen any resistance to glufosinate or the Liberty-based products. So tank mixing those products in the same tank, not sequential applications of 2,4-D plus glufosinate, is going to be much more effective compared to, just your standard 2,4-D plus glyphosate treatment or your 2,4-D plus glyphosate treatment alone. So as far as post-emergence herbicide applications, glufosinate, Liberty, it's a great herbicide, really effective when those weeds are small. Even better, especially when you're in full season soybeans, do you add a residual herbicide at the time of your post-emergence application to maybe give that control get a few more weeks of residual control before those beans start to canopy. However, your best treatments are going to be, again, those tank mixes of those 2 effective post-emergence herbicide, that glufosinate and 2,4-D, and depending on where you are in the season, adding that group 15 herbicide for that extra residual control. And just to show you all an example of how effective that combination of glufosinate and 2,4-D can be, this was a study conducted in Wisconsin this past year. It's a no-till study looking at post-emergence waterhemp control 14 days after treatment, where they looked at just Enlist 1, just Liberty, or a combination of Enlist 1 plus Liberty in 2 different sites. And what they found was the Enlist 1 plus Liberty treatment did much better controlled to either of those active ingredients alone. But there are some considerations with using these 2 products. Just be aware of cutoff dates and growth stages for herbicides. Once soybeans have reached the R1 stage, you cannot spray Liberty or Enlist over the top of soybeans. So if you're in a situation like the picture you see on the right, those beans are already at the flowering stage, and there's really nothing you can spray over the top that is going to control these plants. These plants will have to be pulled. So earlier I mentioned mechanical weed control, and I just want to touch on that again. Primary tillage, like moldboard plow, inverting the soil. From our studies, that one-time moldboard plow without the pre-emergence herbicide and did much better compared to spring tillage every year. Reason being, that one-time moldboard plow is going to invert that soil layer and bury those pigweed seeds deeper than that 1/2 inch to 2 inch depth where they can effectively germinate. But this is not something you want to rely on every year, or essentially you'll just be bringing those seeds back to the soil surface. As I mentioned, inter-row cultivation is going to be effective on small seedlings, especially if you're just trying to start clean. However, as these plants grow larger, as those cultivators are ripping the plants out, if there is any stem or root material still attached to the soil surface, those plants will reroot. Mowing, it can decrease seed production, but it's not going to kill plants. Like cultivation, it's going to require multiple repeated mowings prior to seed production. And again, plants tend to hold on to their seeds at harvest, so mowing can spread seeds. Also, one of the peculiar traits of Palmer amaranth is no matter how big they are, they always tend to set seed. The picture on the right-hand side of your screen, this is a picture I took of a field of Palmer amaranth plants after the field was mowed. Now, you don't see those really tall 1 foot to 2 foot long seed heads, but you do see a lot of seed heads in that field. Palmer amaranth does want to produce a seed head, does want to reproduce no matter what its height. So while we're on the topic of plants holding on to their seeds, whether or not you're running a combine through or mowing, again, the majority of those Palmer amaranth plants are going to retain their seed at harvest, and they will be spread via equipment. So if you have any seeds, any Palmer amaranth plants in your field, it's best, not always practical, to pull those escapes and remove them from the field. But if you absolutely have to run your combines through the field, and I know how excited we get when we finally have the right weather to harvest, consider your harvested area. First, the economics. If your field is completely infested with Palmer amaranth, are you really going to get a good yield out of that crop? If you are, harvest different sections. Harvest the weed-free areas first before moving into those infested areas. That way, you're harvesting the clean areas of your field, and you're not spreading Palmer amaranth into those areas. Then, once you've harvested your infested areas, you do want to clean the combine before moving on to other fields that may or may have not been infested with Palmer amaranth. Another good method for harvest seed control, and I've listed some resources here, is looking at chaff lining. Chaff lining is really just this concept of attaching a chute to the back of your combine. And what that does is it places that weed seed containing chaff in a narrow row behind that combine. So in the case of chaff lining here, these long white lines, those are the chaff line. And what that chaff line does is, one thing, it helps to let you know where your plants are going to be concentrated the next season. That chaff line also concentrates those seeds and helps to expose them to things that will, feed on the seed, exposes them to weather that will help, increase seed decay. So this has been shown to be very effective. Virginia Tech study showed really with no yield reduction in soybeans with chaff lining, and a 60% reduction in weed emergence in that chaff line. Again, most likely due to seed predators in that chaff line and weather conditions making that seed decay a lot quicker. Some organic tactics, flame weeding, those are going to be most effective. Again, when these plants are small, corn can be flamed after emergence or until the growing point is exposed to about the sixth leaf stage. Soy you have to flame before the true leaves have emerged. There are banded flame weeders available, and flame weeders can often be incorporated with cultivation. Flame weeding is not a pre-emergence herbicide. It's going to be similar to cultivation. You're constantly going to have to flame up to a certain point to control Palmer amaranth. One thing that flame weeding does not do is it does not control Palmer amaranth coming up in the inter-row areas between those corn, in those rows between those corn and soybean plants. You're only going to get, that between the rows with those flame weeders. And with flame weeders, you're going to also have to drive at much lower speeds to really get those plants heated up and for that to be an effective treatment. Organic weed control, weed zappers, electrocution, it's effective. However, weeds must be taller than the crop for you to run a lot of those conventional electrical weeders like the weed zapper across. When the weeds are taller than the crop, you've already taken a yield hit from those plants, so it's more or less a rescue treatment. But it's very effective and can reduce seed viability. Those units can be rather expensive, $69,000 for a 15-foot boom to $270,000 for like a self-propelled model. These numbers are a little out of date, so you might be able to get one of these units a little bit cheaper. And you must, again, with these units, you must run a little bit more slowly and produce a significant amount of horsepower to operate anything with that copper toolbar longer than 15 feet. Now, things like the weed zapper, that's probably what a lot of you are familiar with. There are electrical weeders in development that will actually go in between the rows and let you zap those weeds, electrocute those weeds a little bit closer to the soil surface, so you don't have to wait for those weeds to be taller than the crop. And some of that research is still ongoing. Some people have actually invented in a row mowers for soybeans. This picture here kind of looks like a planter. And you have these 5 different rotary mowers attached to the back. You can mow weeds about 2 to 6 inches above the soil surface. It can reduce weed biomass by about 60%. It can also be used with other tactics like cover crops. In organic systems, it's really hard to incorporate cover crops with tillage and still be able to manage your weeds once they come up. So something like, an in-row mower where you have a high residue cover crop suppressing those weeds and coming back and then mowing those weeds when they're small can be an effective treatment. So with that, that is, I know certainly a lot of information, but and unfortunately not all of the information I can provide to you in 1 hour. But if anybody has any questions, I will be glad to answer them at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kurt. That was a lot of information. I know my head is spinning a little bit, even though I've heard you give this or similar presentations a few times, but I think it was all very valuable and useful because, again, these weeds are here. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Hayden has also put the link in the chat for anyone who needed pesticide credits or CCA credits. This was approved for Maryland pesticide, Delaware pesticide, and CCA.
Please feel free to fill that out. It is timed, so I do know when you fill it out, so don't hand it out to people who didn't attend. But we appreciate you filling that out, and there is a comment section on the very end. If you have any ideas you'd like for talks for next year or any ways that we can improve this, you can add in your comments there, and we greatly appreciate it.
If there are no questions, again, Kurt had his email up there. You can also reach out to either one of us and we can get you in touch with him if you come up with one later. But if not, we'll go ahead and let people go because I know that we're all pretty busy. I know Kurt has had a lot going on with you had your weed management meeting last night, right?
Yes, we did.
Oh man. Yeah, you're busy. You're probably looking forward to this weekend. I'm going to go ahead and